In the present day, if I wanted to buy a new set of dining room chairs, I could simply go out to a furniture store and buy them. I probably wouldn't have to spend too much time inspecting each chair before I bought them, because I can assume that they're made on an assembly line. Therefore, they're probably all going to be more or less identical. This type of manufacturing is what's known as mass production. And when it was first introduced over 100 years ago, it dramatically changed millions of lives. Mass production is a way of producing large amounts of standardized material goods, which means that they are all generally identical. In most cases, mass production involves the use of an assembly line, which involves a product being moved down a line as the individual parts are added until it reaches the end of the line as a finished product. Prior to the 19th century, most objects and products were produced by hand, either by a single person or a group of people working together. This process was slow and often produced small batches of items that had no standard shape or size. Throughout the 19th century, however, new tools and technologies allowed for labor to become mechanized, which increased the speed of production and the output of material goods. Eventually, this type of mechanization developed into the type of manufacturing we are familiar with today. As you can probably imagine, things like cars, airplanes, and other machines require many small parts and chemicals in order to be functional. Because the larger machines are designed on an assembly line and are intended to be nearly identical, these parts and chemicals also have to be standardized in order to ensure they work properly. As noted above, standardization is the idea that each object coming off the line will have the same size, shape, and components, and it is the key to successful mass production. Prior to mass production and the industrialization of labor, it was nearly impossible to create a large quantity of something and have each individual piece be identical. Imagine if you were working in an auto plant and had to create each ignition switch by hand. What do you think the odds are that they would all be compatible with the cars coming off the line? In mass production, the standardization of processes and technical specifications allowed for these individual pieces to be identical, which in turn allowed for more complex objects like cars to be produced quickly and affordably. If you were to ask a group of people what they thought was the most significant invention of the 20th century, it's likely that one of the most popular answers would be the automobile. But as much as the automobile changed the way people lived and traveled, it also dramatically altered the way in which products were manufactured. Although cars were being produced throughout the first decade of the 20th century, their production was often slow and costly, which made them expensive and out of reach for most individuals. In 1913, however, Henry Ford, owner of the Ford Motor Company.
Henry Ford changed the American way of life. Ford's designs changed how we get around, from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles. Henry Ford was an engineer and a businessman. He spent his early career working on steam engines. In 1896, Ford built his first car, the quadricycle, and never looked back. He spent the rest of his career making cars. The Model T became the most famous, a car that changed history. Before it were cars that only the very rich could afford. The first Model T was built in 1908, and with the top speed of 45 miles per hour was a much faster way to travel. It was in 1913 that Ford introduced an idea that revolutionized how cars were made. He used an assembly line, a moving belt that would carry car parts to workers, who put the parts and the car together, piece by piece. With the assembly line, a car that once took 12.5 hours to make, now took less than 6. So the Model T cost less and took less time to assemble, making it a car that many working Americans could afford. By 1927, the Ford Motor Company had made a total of 15 million Model Ts.